Great, well, we'll kick off. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on Exporting to the UK, a guide to success for health and beauty brands. My name is Gillian Butler, and I'm an executive with Enterprise Ireland in the London office, and I support multiple sectors, including the consumer goods sector. So our host for today's webinar is Lorcan Sheehan. Lorcan is the CEO and founder of Performance, a highly regarded specialist supply chain consultancy with offices in Dublin, London, and Chicago. Working with clients across healthcare, tech, retail, food and drink, and consumer industries, they've established a reputation for leveraging data and technology to drive supply chain performance improvement and supporting companies through the constant changing landscape of international trade. So today's webinar is focused on providing insights that will assist Irish companies in the health and beauty sector successfully export to the UK. So there has been a lot of uncertainty and complexity resulting from Brexit. However, hopefully by the end of today's webinar, you will have the reassurance that doing business in the UK is still very possible with the right preparation and processes. Today, 18 months on from Brexit, Lorcan will be sharing his learnings so far, looking at managing Brexit customs and trade requirements to do business in the UK, what's coming down the tracks that you as a supplier to the UK need to be aware of, in particular upcoming changes to product labelling and UK responsible person requirements. You will also discuss implementation options for Ireland-based companies and managing ongoing compliance. Today's webinar will be 1 hour long, so Lorcan will be presenting for the first 40 minutes and we'll have 20 minutes for questions at the end. So please do ask questions through the Q&A button on the bottom taskbar, and we will answer as many as we have time for. Any questions that we don't get to, we will follow up on after the webinar. And so without further delay, I will pass you back over to Lorcan, who will commence the webinar.
Thanks, Gillian. Hello, everybody, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you here today. Hopefully, Gillian, can you see that screen there? I'm starting to share.
Yeah, we
perfect.
Can see
good.
You perfect.
So the technology is behaving itself, so it's always a good start to the afternoon. So really appreciate you taking the time today. As Gillian mentioned, I'm Lorcan Sheehan. I run a specialist supply chain consultancy company called Performance. We're based headquartered in Dublin, but we also have offices in London and also in Chicago as well. So very brief about Performance. We're a specialist supply chain consultancy. We have about 25 members on the team and really focus on a number of the areas that you'd see on the right. So a lot around performance improvement within supply chains, international trade and compliance, outsourced process management, channels in terms of how do you use supply chains to enable growth as opposed to just sort of taking cost out. We also do some work around in training and capability development with people, and more as well. There's a focus as well on circular economy and sustainability and risk management. We do have a blog, Supply Chain Enabled, and there's a sort of a screenshot there if you want to do a QR code to sign up for that. Maybe at the end of the hour you decide that's probably not something you want to do, but we'll forgive you for that. So I'm going to, I suppose, maybe just sort of try and lay out, I suppose, some of the opportunity that exists within the UK market, particularly for sort of health and beauty brands. I say we're a supply chain consultancy, so you'll probably know the health and beauty space better than we will know it, but we'll certainly try and lay out the supply chain considerations, some of the trade considerations, some of the regulatory ones, and then we will try and open it up for questions after the fact. But I suppose one of the places maybe to start here is just in terms of the opportunity, within the UK market. I suppose it's our nearest neighbour from a market perspective, population of 67 million. It's in the sort of the top 10 countries in the world from a GDP perspective. So, I think when you look at that opportunity, I know a lot of people have possibly been sort of nervous coming up to Brexit, and nervous of, well, actually, does that mean that the UK is now, less of an attractive target for us? I think what it really means is there are some additional complexities and regulations you need to comply with, but the UK is very much open for business. And I suppose the good news we would say is that, despite all the nervousness and despite, a couple of sort of head-scratching moments in sort of early 2021 as people, wandered into this new world where the UK was outside of the EU from a customs and a trade perspective. Actually, companies are continuing to trade very successfully with the UK. They've got their heads around it. Product is moving. They are also getting around sort of the partnerships that they need, the information that they need for themselves to be able to successfully support that market, and it's working and working well. I suppose on the left-hand side here, I suppose when you look at the opportunities in beauty and healthcare, I sort of pulled this out of some data here. It's more around e-commerce revenue, but I suppose it's reflective of what's happening overall in the market, which would sort of put the UK opportunity for those pieces around sort of 15 billion. Actually, this is in euro here or whatever else in 2022, and I think a growth rate of about 14% per annum. So large market, close to us, growing market, high GDP, and companies are trading successfully with the UK. And even though the UK is outside of the EU, UK and the EU have a trade and cooperation agreement in place, which essentially removes customs and duties, or duties for products of EU origin into the UK, and vice versa for products being traded back the other way. So I suppose if we start with taking a look at, well, what's involved in I suppose getting our products to the UK, and I'm going to do this in a couple of different ways. So I suppose starting firstly is to take a look physically at what's involved and looking at the customs piece. So Ireland has been trading successfully with the UK for many years, obviously, and I think what got everybody worried within the sort of the trading relationship was this new step around, an export from Ireland and an import from into the UK from Ireland as part of this whole process. So it's that piece that I think has got people worried. But I suppose if we start from the perspective of you're a manufacturer, you're shipping to your customers in the UK, typically you're going to have some sort of a haulier or 3PL relationship managing a lot of the transportation needs. There is a requirement within, since 2021 to look at an export from Ireland and an import into the UK. We'll get into that in a little while. And then obviously when the products physically get to the UK, you may be shipping directly to the end customer, or you may actually be shipping through a distributor or other third party or intermediary as part of that. So if you think from the key, I suppose, people from a customs and a trade perspective, I suppose the new piece here is that there needs to be a nominated exporter from Ireland, and there needs to be a nominated importer into the UK as part of that transition. And actually, I probably should narrow that to importer into GB, because trade, between Northern Ireland and Ireland is considered still within the EU, within the EU customs rules. So those are two of the new pieces to that. And I suppose when you look at what's required then to manage those pieces, I think a lot of people got nervous about, well, how do I do export paperwork? How do I do import paperwork and all of those pieces? And by and large, unless you're looking at some of the larger companies, I suppose what a lot of people are doing is they are working with sort of third-party brokers, certainly for the smaller companies, to manage that export out of Ireland, to manage the import into the UK. And in a lot of cases, the hauliers of the 3PLs that they're using also provide that service, so they can engage with one party that manage a lot of this, or the customs and the trade requirements with them. But there are some pieces of information that we're going to talk about on the left-hand side, the EORE numbers, IncoTerms, the classification of the origin, which are a little different and just require a little bit of preparation as you get ready for that. The other thing to bear in mind as well is obviously when you're shipping to customers in the UK, depending on the customer, if it's a retailer, or in some cases people will be going B2C or whatever else, those customers may also have specific requirements. And I think if you are engaging with customers about potential listings of your products, it's very important not only do you understand the physical flow of goods, but that you also understand, well, what are their requirements like around, do they have pre-bookings required? Are there time slots that you need to hit? Are there particular requirements around, pallet and boxing dimensions that they can accept? Are there particular restrictions around the types of vehicles that they can accept? Because I think when you are engaging with your haulier or your 3PL, part of what you will need to do is understand what that entire flow physically is. And then obviously you'll need to understand how that impacts the sort of the overall cost for you and for your team as you do that. The second part here, I suppose, on the pieces on the left, so the pieces that are new is because there is a sort of a customs requirement between Ireland and the UK. Customs need some way of identifying who they're dealing with, so who's making a declaration. And I suppose the mechanism that's being used is this thing called an EORI number, which is it's an economic operator registration, which basically is a sort of a customs registration. Typically, if you apply to revenue in Ireland, if you're an Irish company, they will give you the EORI number. It's a sort of a variation on your VAT or your existing tax number. And then if you're importing into the UK, I suppose the question then becomes, are you managing that import yourself? Or in some cases, your customer may be managing it, or in some cases, your importer may be managing it. And in those cases, it's the EORI number of your customer or whoever is managing or the nominated party for that import. It is possible for an Irish company as well to register for VAT in the UK, even if you're not there, and then also to get a UK EORI number as part of that. But I think the thing to remember as part of that is when you get that registration, then you also need to do UK VAT returns as well as part of the overall piece. There was a piece there called IncoTerms. We'll come to that as well slightly in a couple of minutes. So IncoTerms are a set of sort of 3-letter acronyms, and a lot of people will be familiar with sort of a term called Ex Works, which is one of those, or another one would be delivery duty paid. And what the IncoTerms really determine is who is responsible for the freight of the shipment, where does the shipper respond, the seller responsible to up to a certain point, and where does the buyer take over. But very importantly, the IncoTerms also determines who is responsible for managing that export transaction from a customs perspective, who's also responsible for managing the import as part of that as well. We'll get to classification and origin as well, but that's, I suppose, again, to help customs to try and understand not only who are they dealing with, but actually what are the products that they're dealing with. So customs won't recognize your product by its brand or its description. Customs will actually take your product and they will look for you to classify it. They have a database, a tariff database, which has all different potential classifications of different products. And you can look up on that database and sort of say, well, actually, of the 6,000 or 7,000 potential product classifications, my product most closely fits into this one. And that's a piece of information that you will need to have as part of your shipment. And then the last piece, which is a little bit different, is a thing called origin. And that talks not necessarily where you're shipping from, but it really talks to where the product is manufactured, or if the product is manufactured in multiple areas. Origin really talks to the sort of the most recent sort of substantial transformation of the product overall. So we're going to so keep going just for a second. So if you think through the sort of the physical flow, a second, yeah, perfect. I suppose I made reference to these sort of IncoTerms, and I think Ex Works is the EXW on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is delivery duty paid. And I suppose the way to think of it is if you're buying something typically from an e-commerce perspective, you're expecting the customer or the shipper to actually deliver the products all the way to you. So it's so it's typically you're expecting delivery duty paid. And the annoying piece is when you actually get the delivery and somebody actually is then asking you to sign something or pay a duty or whatever else. And that typically means that somebody hasn't selected probably the appropriate IncoTerm when they're actually making the physical shipment. But you'll see here within what IncoTerms defines is the sort of the responsibility for the export. So who is responsible for that? And you can pretty much see that, with the exception of Ex Works, this is something that the seller is responsible for. So if you're selling into the UK, you're kind of responsible for the export transaction out of Ireland. And then you'll see the import into the UK, you'll see actually with the exception of DDP or some variations on DDP, it's actually the buyer who is responsible for that. And that sounds great until you actually get into the more typical scenario is when you have a, you're dealing with a retailer or a multiple in the UK. I won't say all of them, but quite a lot of them will actually insist on DDP. So, they were looking for people to deliver to their warehouse product that has already cleared for customs within the UK. So in a lot of cases, if you're shipping into those retailers from Ireland, you will actually have to deal with both the export side of things from Ireland, and you will also have to deal with the import side of things from into the UK. So you can actually, there is a question there, and I won't stop for all the questions, but actually it is relevant. You actually can register an Irish company for UK VAT. That would get you a UK EORI number and allow you to help with that. So if we, for a second, so if we then think of, well, okay, we've got this sort of the physical flow of products, there's a customs flow that goes along with that. And what that customs flow typically looks like is so the export process out of Ireland, and then there's an import process into the UK. And the export process out of Ireland starts with what's called a commercial invoice. And in a lot of cases, the commercial invoice is pretty much like any invoice that you would see, but there are some specific data requirements that you need to have on that commercial invoice. And that's where some of these terms that we used earlier on come into play. So the sort of the commercial invoice requirements, there's about 16 pieces of information that you require. The EORI number of the sender and the EORI number of essentially the importer are two of those pieces of information. You've got your IncoTerms, which sort of says, well, actually, how is this, who is responsible for the various different pieces. You've currency, you've got various pieces. You've description of items, so you have to describe what it is you're shipping. But within that description, you also need to include the sort of the HS code or the tariff code. And that's that classification that I referred to a little bit earlier on. And then the last piece there, you'll see on that, and you'll see the various different pieces. You'll see sort of country of origin also as part of that information that you're providing, within that commercial invoice. So, if you think of, well, okay, that sounds complicated. Well, in reality, once you've established trade with your customers, you've already got a definition of who's responsible for the export, who's responsible for the import. If it is you, then you just need to have your EORI number for both sides of that transaction. You will already have details on the IncoTerms. There is a bit of work up front in getting to a sort of your classifications to what that is. But once you've done that once, you have that for all of your subsequent shipments. And then as you bring on additional products, you just need to sort of look at the classifications of those additional products. Some companies will also sort of say, actually, at times, they're not sure, because actually when you read through that database of classifications, it can be a little confusing. But actually, if you sort of, and I won't bring you through it here right now, but again, if there's a need to follow up, we can certainly follow up with some of the folks via Enterprise Ireland. But there's also some cases where actually you're not sure. Your product could be one or one of a number of different classifications. And in those cases, you could actually apply to get what's called a BTI, which is a binding tariff indication, which gets revenue or HMRC to rule on. They have looked at your product, you submit some information to them, and they would give you a ruling back. That's probably more of an exception rather than a rule, but it just gives you sort of some comfort, particularly if there's duty or other elements or differences between the different classifications. So once you have that sort of commercial invoice, then you have, the export process here on the top hand side. There's a thing called an export SAD, which is an export document. And so, I suppose the good news for a lot of folks is they typically stop the process themselves at commercial invoice. And then when it comes to export SAD and pre-boarding notifications and import SAD, all of that is typically handled by their broker. So if you do the work up front, and in some cases your broker will help you on the information, they will then actually, and in many cases, people will use a broker that is also their third-party logistics provider. In many cases, once you've got the information from the commercial invoice, you're then just handing it off to the broker. They're completing that export document, which is the SAD. Before they can get on board a ship, they need to have that completed. They get a confirmation back from revenue. And then on the UK side, there is an equivalent of that document, which is an import SAD, which is also completed by the broker based on the information that's on the commercial invoice. If there are duties or there are taxes that are required, they're typically paid at the point of entry, but there are opportunities to sort of set up a sort of deferral account. So you can actually defer that payment, you can do the declaration, but you don't need to have a check for your broker or for whatever it is to do that clearance on your behalf. That can become part of your subsequent returns as part of that. So if you think of it, yes, there's some preparation work to be done up front. There is, for a lot of companies, the choice then becomes, who do I work with from a third-party logistics perspective, or from a customs and from a duty perspective. But then it's really just a matter of having your shipments ready and making sure you've got the information available on the commercial invoice. And I suppose the one piece to the one caveat I'd sort of say to that is, because we've seen a lot of people where they did what they needed to do to keep shipments going. But even though you may have a broker that is making the declarations on your behalf, you as a company are still responsible for what they have declared. It's like having your tax accountant do your tax return on your behalf. They're pushing the button and entering the information, but ultimately you're the one that is responsible for the information that they have entered on your own behalf. So a couple of things on that is, and we've seen this particularly now that we're sort of 18 months down the road. A couple of things there is to make sure that you are actually aware of, and that periodically you would audit the information that's being submitted on your behalf, because at some point that could be subject to a HMRC or a revenue audit on your own purposes. We're not VAT experts or whatever else, or tax experts, but the VAT, as I say, the registrations, that can also be managed as well as part of this overall process. So that's the sort of the physical flow and the customs flow of the goods. And then I think we I suppose come to some of the more specifics then around sort of the cosmetics and the sort of the health and beauty products or whatever else that are there. And again, you see many of the same, I suppose, actors in the supply chain. So still have your same physical flow of goods up top. But now actually, because you are actually shipping a regulated product into the UK, and for the purpose today, we're sort of focusing very much on your sort of cosmetics and your health products. There are other regulations with similar terms if you get further into the medical devices and other regulated products or whatever else, which we won't cover here today. Wouldn't get a chance to, I suppose, in the time frame that we've got. But it's a similar structure, I suppose. So within the regulations, there are definitions. So definitions here is typically a lot of you would be what we would call a manufacturer. So you're the one who makes the cosmetic product or has designed and manufactured it, and it's under your name and under your trademark. Interestingly enough, here you also have a concept of an importer. And actually the importer here is a very different concept to the importer from a customs perspective, because they have, even though they both use the same term, they actually have slightly different meanings. So this is essentially the person or the business based in the UK who is placing the product from a country outside the UK on the GB market. And that's a specific role associated with that. You may also have some distributors who are sort of and you could have multiple distributors within your supply chain going to customers. And they are somebody other than the manufacturer or importer that's supplying those products to customers in the GB market. And there are some definitions of, well, what's an importer responsible for, what's a distributor responsible for. But the big one is the one that's beneath that, which is a concept called a responsible person. And again, if you're already dealing in EU markets, you may already be familiar with some of these concepts, because essentially what's happening here is the UK, when Brexit happened, what actually happened was the UK took a lot of what was based on the EU regulation, and they have sort of copied it for the purposes of the UK regulation. But the responsible person, again, must be somebody based, or company based in the UK, and they are responsible for ensuring compliance with the regulations, including product safety and product notifications, as well as part of that. And then the other, I suppose, really important stakeholder, I suppose, within all of this is the regulatory responsible body in the UK is what's called the Office for Product Safety and Standards, or OPSS for short, because we all don't have enough acronyms in our lives. So again, you know, you're thinking, okay, well, I've solved for the physical piece. I've got my head. Hopefully, you're starting to get our head around the customs piece. And I'm going to spend the next few slides just talking about sort of some of the responsibilities associated with some of the regulatory sides of this as well. And probably the most important one is this notion of the responsible person. And this responsible person must make sure the cosmetic products that they make available are safe for the market. So this is a nominated individual. And again, you got a list here. I'm not going to read line for line. By the way, the presentation will be shared with anybody who's here. So hopefully, you know, you get some benefit in there, and hopefully the references as well, where we have them, we've also tried to include some references back to the actual guidance from the UK authorities. So if there's elements that maybe aren't fully answered here, the guidance will probably answer some more of those and have some more details associated with it. But, you know, key elements here is, well, what are the ingredients in the product? What are the restrictions on the products themselves? There's a product information file, which is a lot of sort of detailed information around the product itself, and it must be kept for sort of a period of 10 years after the last batch of the product is made available. Responsible for any information around packaging, labeling, and instructions for use of the product. And they're also the ones that must register with the Office of, Product Safety and Standards about the product before it's made available to customers and consumers. So I suppose this is sort of one of the key points here is before you can place a product on the market, that must be notified in advance. And we'll come back to a little bit more on the notifications in a while. There's also notifications of any serious harmful effects if there are any reported associated with the product. If there are claims in terms of that are made about what the product can do beyond just a cosmetic effect, there must be the ability to prove some of those claims. And actually, if any of those claims go sort of further into the medical arena, some of those claims then come under a different set of regulations under the equivalent, I suppose, of the Irish HPRA. So the UK's equivalent would also have some additional regulations associated with that. And then there's also the ability to provide traceability data about who the product has been supplied to, keeping this data for 3 years, following the date again that the last product was made available to distributors. So, you know, large and responsible role must be based in the UK for product that's being shipped into GB. And we'll talk a little bit more now in terms of just some of those elements as well and how those elements come to place. So we mentioned the Office of Product Safety and Standards. So again, cosmetic products obviously being made available on the GB market must be notified to them, and there's a portal, and we have a link there to the portal on how you can do that. This is, suppose, for those of you who are already trading in the EU have a cosmetic products notification portal, and this is the equivalent for the UK, and the notification is made by your responsible person. And I suppose, the reality as well is this is, again, regulated product. You're putting a regulated product on the market. If you don't do the notification, there are fines, prison term up to 3 months if you don't do the notification. So probably something I know myself, when people tell me prison term is one of the options in terms of fines or whatever else, that's something to certainly take seriously. So there are some transition arrangements, but in reality, the transition arrangements have kind of already passed for this. So because this was came into effect from sort of January 2021, if the product was already on the market in the UK or in GB before then, you kind of had 90 days after the fact to register and notify your cosmetic products for the UK market. Not relevant if you're if you're only starting now. Highly relevant if you're thinking, hang on, I've had that product on the market. Have I already done that? Probably worth checking on that. So for a lot of you, it's a case of, okay, I'm putting new products onto the GB market. And if I am putting the new products in the GB market, I suppose the key here is it must be notified before it can be placed on the market. So we're going to talk a little bit about the, the sort of the labeling changes or whatever else here. But I suppose, even though that doesn't have to happen until the sort of the 1st of January 2023, to do the notification, you do need a UK-based responsible person, and they need to have the relevant information to supply to the UK database. There are some additional notifications associated with the use of nanomaterials. You probably know better what nanomaterials are than I do. But if there are sort of novel nanomaterials that are used, actually that notification must be notified 6 months in advance of those products being placed on the UK market. And then the last piece here is around serious undesirable effects. So this is possibly where somebody has a negative impact or negative effect from the use of this product, that there is a facility to have that reported. And then that notification doesn't necessarily mean that the product isn't compliant. It could be more to do with the individual than to do necessarily with the product. But then there is also a form and a need to notify those elements as well as part of the process. Okay, so product labeling. So there are some changes that are happening here, I suppose, in general. There are some requirements here in terms of product, the labeling being easy to read, must contain the name of an address of the responsible person. Country of origin is an interesting one here. So UK is quite specific here. So if a product is coming from the EU, made in the EU is not acceptable. That actually they would want it to be made in the specific country, in our case Ireland. The weight and volume, the date, use by date for the product, precautions and identification numbers, various pieces. So a couple of changes here. So any product being placed in the GB market must have the name and address of the UK-based responsible person on the label. Now there is an easement here, and this is where there is a transition option available, is that if you have an existing product with the name and address of an EU-based responsible person, that is allowed during the transition period, and that transition period happens up to December 31st, 2022. And I've already sort of covered the elements there in relation to the country of origin. And Northern Ireland is slightly different, and we'll actually have a sort of separate slide on Northern Ireland as well in a couple of minutes. Bear with me for a second. Okay. Good. One final piece here in relation to the product itself, and apologies if this is too much detail. There's probably another 10 slides worth of detail we've chosen not to put in terms of, there are regulations, by the way, in terms of what you can and cannot have within products. So if you need to take a look at those as well, or if you need information on those, we can give you links to it. But for those of you who have products that have aerosol dispensers, in addition to having to comply, I suppose, with the requirements for the cosmetics, the actual dispenser itself then also needs a compliance mark associated with it. If you are used to, again, having your product distributed in the UK or in the EU, you'd be very familiar with the CE mark for EU products. The UK has brought out its own version of that, essentially, called the UK CA mark. And the UK CA mark should be on your product from the 31st of December 2022. But there is an easement on that as well, that if it can't be physically indelibly on the product, it can be affixed in a label or an accompanying document to the product up to the end of 2025. Again, for Northern Ireland, they don't use UK CA mark, and they go with the sort of the EU conformity markings, in this case, the CE mark. Back to, I suppose, just clarity, I suppose, really on Northern Ireland. You'll hear a lot of talk about Northern Ireland Protocol, but essentially with the Northern Ireland Protocol, allows us to do is that Northern Ireland probably has the benefit of both jurisdictions, but in terms of product regulation, they follow the EU regulation for cosmetic products, and that means that the cosmetics that are placed on the Northern Ireland market that are either from the Northern Ireland or from the EU, that they must comply with the EU regulations. The responsible person in this case should be based in Northern Ireland or in the EU, but not in GB. The notification, for any of the notifications are again back through the EU portal. And if there's relevant nanomaterials or other pieces, that's also through the EU portal as well. There are some elements where there's a slightly different set of rules again for cosmetics placed in the Northern Ireland market from GB. Again, it's recognizing the fact that they must comply with EU regulations. Again, the responsible person in Northern Ireland. And likewise, as we've already sort of said as well, that actually, interestingly here, that aerosols will continue to have the EU CE mark as part of that. There's one piece there that actually, again, if you've got products manufactured in GB, going to Northern Ireland, it will need to be labeled with made in the UK. So look, apologies, there's a lot of detail and a lot of words in all of those slides. And I suppose, I wish there was a sort of a graphic way that we could sort of make this sort of a lot easier to sort of to read and to understand or whatever else. But I suppose it's important to be able to take a look at those in that ways. So as you then look at, well, actually this responsible person piece, it seems to be a fairly significant requirement and is a very significant requirement from the regulatory perspective in actually placing your product on the GB market. And I suppose the responsible person, can be any one of the following. So it can be the manufacturer, it can be the importer, it could be the distributor if they actually label the product as their own. Or another option is to have an appointed company. So there are companies that act as what's called authorized representatives of the manufacturer or whatever else. And again, I suppose when we've looked at these things in the past, if you're a large entity, you may already have another entity within the UK, and that could well be an efficient option for you. But for a lot of sort of smaller companies, the whole setup and all of those things are possibly a little bit daunting. So if that's not a route that you want to go, maybe something like the appointed, the authorized representative would be something that would be worth considering. If the product is made in the UK and sold in GB, by default, it's considered to be the manufacturer. If it's made outside the UK and imported, then by default, it's considered the importer is considered to be the one that's the responsible person. So I suppose that's if you don't take other action, this is who is considered to be the responsible person. However, it is possible to sort of nominate somebody other than the default, but it's by a written mandate. So there's a written agreement which says, this third-party agent must be based in the UK, and they must accept the responsibility with a written mandate. Typically, what you'll see is there is a set of typically you'll see there's a sort of a scope of what they're responsible for, scope of what they would actually need, and then the written mandate allows them to take a look at or to formally declare that they are the responsible person for those particular products. So just I suppose maybe to recap a little bit on some of the key dates that we've sort of covered, I think thus far in the presentation. I suppose UK left EU at the end of January 2020. There was a transition period up to the end of December 2020, and up to that date, the EU cosmetics regulations applied. From that date onwards, there was a sort of a 3-month. From that date onwards, anything new had to be pre-notified before the products were put onto the GB market. The date when the UK responsible person is required is also from the 1st of January 2021. And then I suppose you had your 90 days towards the end of March 2021 as the deadline for notifying your existing products to the UK's cosmetic notifications. And then towards the end of December as well, this is where you have the transition arrangements for labels for the UK market. changes, where you must have the name of the responsible person in the GB market on your label, and that's also the time frame as well, from where you need to have the UK CA mark as part of that. And then you've got a transition arrangement up to 2025, up to when the UK CA mark may be affixed via label to the product. So I suppose, I think we've sort of rambled through a lot. Hopefully there's some benefit there for you as part of that. I think we're relatively on time in terms of the 40 minutes or so. I suppose maybe just close with sort of this slide here, which is to sort of think through from a company perspective. If you're preparing to sell into sort of the UK or specifically into the GB market, there's layers of preparation to be done, but it's actually highly achievable, and you've got a market that's certainly worth pursuing as part of that. Part of that preparation is obviously, from a company perspective, having your EORI number for yourself, and if you're the importer into the UK, for that. The VAT preparation. There is the choosing of partners, whether those logistics partners or customs brokers or distributors, if you're looking at some of those pieces, and understanding the impact of all of these things on your costings as well. So each of these partners and each of those declarations, there's the cost associated with that. There's an element of product preparation here as well. So there's the classification of your product. So there's sort of the tariff codes and various pieces, your origins, the product information file, making sure that that's available, making sure that your labeling is meeting the requirements associated as well. Then you've got your regulatory preparation, which is talking about your responsible person, having clarity on who that would be, the notifications that you need to give in advance of putting product on the market, and the need to make sure that you're also prepared to manage the traceability requirements as well of the products as well when it comes to that. So and then the last and probably the most important of these things is to engage with your customers. Understand what they need, and hopefully some of this will I suppose alert you to maybe some of the questions to be looking out for, and things like IncoTerms. What are the volumes? Are there any specific requirements they have in terms of routing or packaging or booking in slots? What sort of frequency of deliveries are they looking at? Because all of those things will then sort of factor into the logistics solution you're using, the costs associated with it. Am I shipping pallets or am I shipping boxes? And at what sort of frequency am I going to be doing that? So you can work all of your requirements into the sort of your overall costs as well for supporting the market. So I think that is all I wanted to bring you through. I suppose my details are there again if you want them. I'm happy to go back to you, Jill, and see. I know there's a few questions in, and I got distracted a couple of times trying to sort of glance down at the questions. But I'm happy to see if we can answer what we can answer. If we can't answer anything here, I'll certainly will take the details and we'll come back to folks with an answer if we can at all.
That's great. Thank you very much for that, Lorcan. That was really insightful. And as you said, there was a lot of information there. But as mentioned, the slides will be shared around afterwards, and also a recording, so you can go back on any parts in particular that you might find it a bit confusing. But also, if you do want to catch up with Lorcan at some stage, you can contact him through us. So if you'd like to get in touch with us, then we can kind of liaise with Lorcan on that. And I'm sure he'd be happy to help out with any further queries around anything he's discussed today. And so we do have about 6 or 7 questions in so far. So I'll start running through them there.
Yeah.
So just to kick off, we have a question. Can an Irish exporter to the UK use the same label used in Ireland if there is a UK address and an Irish address?
Yeah, so typically what you can do is you can actually, good question, you can actually design your label such that it can be used for both jurisdictions. So to the extent that that you can incorporate sort of the UK responsible person and the EU responsible person on the one label, that is something that you can do.
Brilliant.
Yep.
And there was a question around EORI, which I know you covered during the presentation. So one on, so do nutrition products like supplements need to be notified? So just around the Office of Notifications there.
The short answer is probably yes, but this is one of those ones that I'd probably just try and take a little bit more detail in terms of the product and come back to you on that, because this is one of the, this is a regulated industry or a regulated product. There are products, sort of further regulated products further up and further down as well associated with that. So if you want to give me the details of that particular person, whatever else, I'll shoot that, and we'll actually share the answer as well out to folks as well through yourselves.
That would be great. And just to acknowledge, there was kind of a similar question around.
Because I see that as well.
Yeah, it just says where you reference cosmetics throughout, do the same principles or rules apply? So
and look, what I'd say to you is all of them will have similar principles. What may be slightly different is who the responsible authority is in terms of in terms of who do you notify, who do you go to. But this, most of these sort of products are in a very similar, a similar sort of regulatory space, but they'll have different specific core legislation that drives, okay, well, who do you report to? What are the time frames or whatever else? But what we try to do here is give you something which is close to the overall, but if there are specific questions for specific companies, very happy to get involved and answer those if we can.
That'd be great. Thank you. And I suppose in light of recent news, do you think the appointment of a new PM in the UK will result in more changes?
Yeah,
so
we'd all love to know the answer, I suppose, in some respects, to that one. What I'd say in general is, I think there's a lot of discussion, particularly around Northern Ireland Protocol, and there are some very difficult political issues, I think, to be got through in relation to that. Our experience is the UK, beyond the sort of the political headlines or whatever else, is very much open to business, and they're very much trying to facilitate business. And I'll give you an answer to that and it might answer another question that sometimes we get around Brexit is, how real are the deadlines? When we say this must happen by the 31st of December, the answer to that is the deadline is real. And I think people need to be preparing for that, particularly when you consider the lead times for changing and packaging and labeling and various other pieces. But certainly an example, for example, in food and drink, there is a similar labeling change which is due to happen on the 1st of October. And literally 2 days ago, we got a notification that there was an extension to that deadline to the 31st of December 2023. Now that's don't everybody relax and assume that this will also happen here. But the reason they did that is they sort of said, the rationale they gave at the time, partly maybe the industry wasn't fully ready, I think, but part of the other rationale is, the UK is very much dealing with inflation, no more than anybody else. They're very much dealing with higher costs, and anything that is seen as additional regulation that goes towards increasing cost is something that the UK seem to be trying to at this stage sort of say, well, like, if we can defer that or avoid that or whatever else for a period of time, we will do so. So I would say, there is a change in political leadership in the UK. That doesn't mean that customers in the UK aren't going to want to buy health and beauty products any less than they already do. So I think the market opportunity would be there. I think even if there was a significant change in direction when it comes to things like trade policy with Europe or whatever else, the time frames for these things to happen is months and possibly years rather than weeks. We've had some briefings in the past that if the UK did trigger Article 16 or whatever it was in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol, the response time, there are responses from the EU that could happen, and that, yes, ultimately could escalate into a trade war or whatever else. But at the pace that these things move at, you're probably looking at sort of 6 to 9 months before there's an effective response. And then you're looking at probably another 6 or 9 months or another year or 2 years before you get to the sort of escalations that we're looking at. So I suppose our advice would be, look, we have to keep an eye on what's happening in terms of political leadership. But certainly all the institutions in the UK that are managing these things are very much of we're open for business, we're here, we're doing this to trade and to trade internationally. Yet we want to keep a little bit more control on how we do that. We want to put some of our own regulations in. But I wouldn't think that there'd be significant changes. And you can probably ring me back in 3 months' time if I'm horrendously wrong in relation to that.
It'd probably be around 6 to 9 months anyway.
Possibly, yeah, possibly. You never know.
No, that's great. Great to get your insight on that. So we just have 2 more questions left. So just a little bit of
Yeah.
warning if there are any more coming in. Please do click on the Q&A down the bottom. So is the UK CA marking required even if you did not use the CE marking?
Yeah, I suppose, so the question is, I suppose, if you didn't need the CE marking, then you don't need the UK CA marking. It might be worth taking a look, however, at some of the regulations, and actually we'll in the presentation, I think we have a link to the regulations. It's primarily around the aerosol, which is the product or whatever else. So if you have that and you didn't have the CE mark, maybe take a look at the regulations to see should you have had it. But by and large, the UKCA is replacing for the products that needed in the past the CE marking.
Perfect. And one final question was, can you recommend some good ORP companies in the UK for cosmetics?
Yeah, I suppose we have, as part of preparation for this, I think we probably have a list of sort of 6 or 7 that we have come across. We've had initial conversations with, because this is one of these things. There are hundreds of RP companies that are out there. What you really are looking for some folks who have experience in the types of products that you're dealing with. So if you're a medical device company, you want to find somebody with medical devices. If you're a health product company, you want to find somebody with experience on that. I think we have a list of about 5 or 6, and we're quite happy to share that through the Enterprise Ireland team. We're not in a position to recommend any one as over the others or whatever else, but I'd sort of say these are ones we've as preparation for this, we have looked through, we've had initial conversations with, we've validated that they have clients in this particular area. But as and I think what you'll find in all of them, and I know this from other sectors as well, is it's worth having 2 or 3 conversations, because they will all have fees associated with it, and the fees will represent, I suppose, the level of risk and the level of work that they're taking on your behalf. But some of them will do it by product, some of them will do it by product group that have slightly different pricing strategies, and you're not necessarily looking for the cheapest here, but you are looking for somebody who is a professional at what they do, who can be a useful advisor for you in this as you go forward, and somebody you feel you can work with, which I suppose is important in all of these things.
Great. Well, that was the last of our questions. So unless there are any more, then I think we can start to wrap up. So as mentioned, we will send around the recording and the slides after this webinar. And if you do have any questions after reviewing everything, or you log out of the webinar and you think, oh, I should have asked that question, then do just get in touch with us. I'll be emailing you directly later today or tomorrow with the information. So don't hesitate to respond. And again, we will liaise with Lorcan if there is anything that comes up.
Perfect. Well, listen, really appreciate your time. Thank you, everybody.
Great.
And thanks, Gillian.
No, thanks a million, Lorcan. Great presentation.
Not at all.
Chat to everyone soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.